Alright, hey everybody, it's me, John. Thank you for joining me this Thursday on Painting with me, John. I wish I thought about my sentence structure before starting. But today we're going to be working with white. I am working on a preview model from Privateer Press, which is Kommadant Sorscha. She's one of the new models from the Manowar CID. And she's got a special place in my heart, because Manowar are what got me originally into War Machine. So I'm really excited to be working on this model before official release. And it's also really nice because I get the added challenge of painting white. So I'll be talking a little bit about color theory and about why I'm choosing the colors that I'm choosing and what I've done already to get her to this point. And hopefully you guys can chime in with either how you like to paint white or specific questions that you have about what I am doing as well. So as always, if you guys are watching, stay high, comment, be active. It's a great way to know if I'm on the right course for what I'm doing here on the stream. And it also allows me to help you guys with minimal hunting you get guys down and demanding what y'all need. So as of right now, I've already zenithal primed Sorscha. So I started with a black, and then I went to a white. Hey, Mark. And now I'm adding in the first base shade. Can you grab my phone? Sorry about that, guys. So I zenithal primed. So a black primer with a hard coating of white on top of that. And then I've also started my initial white coats. And my initial white is going to be a mix of Gravedigger Denim and Sickly Skin from P3. I'm going to try to stick to all P3 colors on here. So I'm not going to be relying on any Games Workshop shades or anything like that. I'll be making everything myself. But yeah, so from the initial tone of the Gravedigger Denim plus the Sickly Skin, I then made a shade out of both Crick's Bane Highlight and then a touch of Crick's Bane Base in order to make this nice greenish shadow color. I'm not sure how well it translates for those watching at home, but it is this really kind of nice greenish blue transition, but it's very muted. And I'll be trying to keep that going the entire model. So layering in the shadows is going to take a little bit, just because I've really thinned down my wash, so I can be more subtle with the shadows. That's going to be one of the important things with painting white, is keeping things thin and always, always, always being willing to come in and do multiple layers. If you guys are really enthusiastic and you either gunk on a bunch of white or paint white and it's a nice solid white and then hit it with a shade and make it this really muddy, that's probably that may not be the effect you're looking for, and you can solve a lot of that by just being nice and patient, keeping things thin, and doing multiple layers to eventually build up the effect that you want. And that's always, always, always going to be my recommendation. And also, when I'm working with white, I like to make sure that whatever my final result is not technically a true white. It's always going to be an off-white, because I find monochromatic white doesn't allow you to necessarily translate a lot of emotion or feeling of a character or the situation they're in. But adding little tints of color will make things a lot easier in terms of adding character and depth. So Joe's here with me.
Hey guys.
And Joe will be manning the camera, so if you guys see anything wrong with the cameras, or if you need another angle or something goes wrong with the screen, holler at me to holler at Joe, and we'll get things working.
Well, I mean,
Oh, yeah. I have the utmost confidence in your ability, Joe. So one of the nice things about keeping things thin and also starting with the Zenithal highlight is it kind of shows you where the shadows are supposed to be anyways. So any part where I put on the initial white coat and it looks more grayish than white, it's very easy for me to be like, okay, cool, that's where a shadow is supposed to be. And it's a great way to help me block shadows in and keep things interesting. So I'm going to be just kind of following the lines of the model. There's a lot of great line work in this particular piece. So if you guys haven't checked her out, she'll be here at the store, and you can pick her up. I want to say the middle of the month is her release date. But until then, you'll have to kind of watch me put her together and paint her. And I always like at this stage to be probably a little bit more aggressive than you think you would need with the shadows, because this is not the last stage. This is not your like final
countdown.
Yeah, so like you can come back and fix a lot of this stuff in the like next highlighting phase, but it's really important to establish everything so like you actually have contrast in the model. The scheme I decided to go with my Khador is going to be the fifth Border Legion, which is a natural like olive color, which is why I decided to do the shadows and the white as kind of like a cool, almost greenish, just to kind of like tie her in with it. She's still going to be her particular legion. Sorscha was the one, little history lesson. In Khador, she was the one who pioneered the concept of, hey, we fight in the snow all the time, why aren't we using camouflage? And originally the response is, well, we're Khador, we're tougher than them, they should be able to see us coming. And once the gun was started being widely used, they're like, maybe we need to rethink that. Maybe it's time to use a little bit of camouflage. Maybe Sorscha's onto something.
So snowtroopers.
Mm-hmm. And so Sorscha is generally depicted usually in white armor, and so that's the reason why, even though she's part of the 5th Border Legion, which is the olive, I decided to keep her in her traditional white.
Nice. Now, you played a game of War Machine earlier today.
I did. Hopefully you guys caught that on stream. You got to watch me lose real hard.
Oh.
But I had a lot of fun, and I think I learned a lot. Okay. So that's something.
Right. Are the Gatormen still weak, like you said at the beginning?
Was that?
Are the Gatormen still weak, or like the weakest faction, or have they grown in strength?
No. They're definitely a lot stronger than they used to be. Like, when they were weak, this was like years ago.
Oh, okay.
So they've since received a bunch of benefits and a bunch of ways to become at least equal footing with other factions. But they still struggle versus certain things, and I definitely played against something that I would count as a struggle. So, but I got to learn a lot from it, and I think I know how to play differently now, at least versus that list. So if you guys haven't checked it, you can watch me in all of my glory on our YouTube or Facebook page or on Twitch.
Absolutely. So, but no, I gotta learn War Machine.
Yeah,
I actually gotta start a faction. What were the elves, right?
Yeah, you were looking at Retribution.
Retribution, okay.
And they are the Kill All Humans faction.
Okay, alright, okay, that sounds loving and kind and...
Elves in this game are the youngest race, and they are also the possibly like one of the more xenophobic ones. They don't like the other races outside of elves all that much, and they especially don't like humans because they think humans are partly responsible for the downfall of their gods. So the elves are doing what they can to ensure their longevity, and they think they have a pretty honest chance if they kill all of the human spellcasters that their gods might get better. because their gods are currently sick. And they think human magic is directly responsible. So it's definitely interesting. It's not your standard elf fluff.
No, I was supposed to be enlightened.
Well, so in this one, they are the most intelligent race,
Okay.
but since they're the youngest, they're also the most immature. So they have all the technology and tools to succeed and do well, they just lack the wisdom for understanding.
Okay.
So they are definitely the most advanced race out there. But like I said, maturity is what they're lacking.
All right. Well, that's gonna be an interesting race to play for the first time.
Yeah.
Now, what's the best race to play with if you're starting out to play War Machine?
I usually recommend something that is a little on the resilient side. So you want something that can take a hit
Okay.
and then keep going.
All right.
And you can find that in most factions. But some factions just have it a lot more prevalent than others. So, like Khador is usually typified by having heavy armored infantry, like Sorscha. She is wearing a heavy steampunk warcaster armor, which will definitely keep her safe on the battlefield. It does slow her down. She used to be one of the quickest warcasters out there. But since adopting the suit, her speed has tremendously dropped.
Now, what is she from the elves or who's she from?
No, she's from Khador. She's from steampunk Russia.
Okay, that's right.
So
Steampunk Russia, you said?
steampunk Russia.
Okay. For the motherland.
Exactly. So she has a lot of stuff going for her, despite the fact that she lost speed. She still has a lot of tricks out there,
Okay.
and ways to make herself go faster, regardless of what her actual speed stat is. So that's a pretty important factor. But like, yeah, as a new player, I usually direct people. It's like, hey, whatever faction you start using like more warjacks and things that are going to be more resilient, just as a way to keep yourself in a game longer. Because if you run a bunch of fragile stuff, you might run against an opponent who's, pretty savvy in the rules and knows how to disable the lightly armored stuff with relatively little difficulty. And that means it just takes you right out of the game, right? Like, if you lose all of your fragile stuff super early, then what's the point?
Now, I keep hearing this terminology. What is a warjack?
Warjack is the steam automaton that follows your generals in the battle. So like Sorscha is a warcaster, and she is usually accompanied by several warjacks at any given fight.
So that is every race has a warjack?
Not every race. Some races actually have war beasts,
Ah.
and Retribution has something known as myrmidons. And myrmidons are... So the warjacks are usually typified by a steam engine attached to them. The elves get to use these magical devices that power their thing. So like their robots are literally powered by magic. And that's usually a pretty big deal because it saves them in a lot of regards. Like, it makes them a little bit more efficient. It gives them an access to a wider variety of special rules. And it also gives them force fields, which is pretty cool.
Force fields. I love force fields.
Yeah, so unlike all the other warjacks in the game, the elfin ones have force fields innately in them. And with those, it allows you to take some damage without it affecting a core system to your robot. And so those robots have their arm systems, their weapons, their brains, all that sort of stuff is like given on a system stat in those models. Mm-hmm. But the nice thing about the elf jacks is you don't have to worry about one of those getting broken or destroyed until they get all the way through your force fields. And that's a pretty big plus. At least I think so. Right, Mark?
What's that?
Force fields, good?
Yeah. Some even can regenerate them.
Actually, all force fields can regenerate.
But I mean, with the help of other things.
Yeah. So you can always spend some of your resources during your turn to bring your force fields back up to full. So if your opponent doesn't disable your ability to have a force field, it means that you can keep constantly refilling it and make your opponent like keep attacking you to like whittle it down. So that to me is a really strong ability, and it's also really good for beginning players because hey, I know my Myrmidons, my Elfin Warjacks, are going to be more resilient than a lot of other folks, which I think is pretty awesome. So yeah, I think you can start any faction. I think a lot of it is just going to be figuring out which one you like the look of. So if you like the look of elves, Joe, you can definitely play elves. Elves can definitely be beginner friendly. Nothing you have to worry about there. And then from there, it's finding a list that is resilient enough and then gives you enough special rules to learn the game. So like you want to make sure that like you have a list that has all the core concepts down so you can kind of learn piecemeal as you play this like smaller resilient list everything that your list can do. Does that make sense?
No, it does. Now does this game have like a simpler rules than a 40k? Does it have to do? I mean,
I would actually probably say it is more complex than 40k.
Okay.
Now, usually the appeal of War Machine is that the rule set is usually a little bit more concise than 40k. As in, like, there's less overall FAQs and rules debate in the game, but there's more rules in general. So, like, it's a cleaner game, and you get to kind of know you know that for the most part things are balanced and that you'll get a fair shake while playing it. However, it's a little bit on the more complex side. But I enjoy it because it is a little more complex and that it also does have that like inherent like, oh hey, I know this game is pretty balanced. I never have to complain about like XYZ being broken because at the end of the day, like something that is perceived super strong is only minutely more strong than like the weakest thing. So it's better balance is what I'll always say. And I'm sure there's plenty of people out there that would disagree with me or say, oh no, I've had difficulty like playing a balanced game or doing whatever. So I can just tell you what my opinion is, in that I've been playing this game since I was 14 or 15 or whatever. I don't know.
It's been around that long.
Yeah, it's on its 15th year. So maybe I was 16, and that would work out timeline-wise better.
What edition is it in?
We're in its 3rd edition. And it is, the 3rd edition had a really rough start, and it is now probably one of the most balanced and fun, at least to me, games out there. And I like the fluff a lot. I've been listening to a lot of different podcasts and streams and people talking about their favorite stories and like how each character has progressed and changed over the last 15 years of fluff. And it's been really cool to listen to. I've really enjoyed it. So
that's one of the things about these games and their universes. It's always about war, which makes sense because fighting.
Yeah, and so it's one of those things that's nice, especially in a game system like War Machine. There's a lot of different outlets. Like, so they have a bi-monthly magazine, and in there they talk a little bit about like what's going on outside of just the war. Like, you know, they just released this like RPG supplement called the Strangelight Workshop, where you get to play a steampunk Ghostbuster.
Oh wow!
And who doesn't want to do that?
True.
I know, I want to do that.
Who are you gonna call?
Steampunk Ghostbusters.
Steampunk's Ghostbusters.
So
Steampunk Ghostbusters, yeah.
they, so you know, it's just like one of those things where they do kind of expand the world, make sure that you see it more than just, you know, only war. But yeah, I'm still working on the shades here. I'm making sure that my shade mix is constantly moist with a little bit of water added into it. Just so I can finish a lot of these shadows before it completely dries out on me. And it's something to keep mindful of, especially if you're using a wet palette, is that given the amount of work you're doing, your paint will eventually start drying out and becoming thicker, and it could result in a different application of what the shade or shadow is. So I just thinned down my paint a lot to make sure it was nice and thin, so I can kind of go in, especially on the tighter areas, and make it like a wash again, so it automatically goes towards those like cracks and crevices. So I am working my hardest to kind of paint the inner legs and things like that, especially this like Crick's Bane color, because that area won't ever really be truly like white, just because of how shadows work. So I'll be coming back with a little bit of highlighting and a little bit of more defined shadows, especially on the darker parts, to make sure that the shadows are popping and that you guys see the proper color transition from like this pure white to pure black. And I want to go back to the sickly skin. So I'm mixing sickly skin, and what I'll probably do is just add a little bit of pure white to it, just so I can start doing this highlight. The issue with the pure white is that it has a tendency to, usually in my experience with pure white paints, is that it has a chance of getting like chalky. And so making sure that it's really thin is really, really important. Hopefully you guys could see me mix that a little bit. So building up the white is probably going to be the longest part, because what I'm going to be doing is hopefully blending in a lot of the shadows and midtones to make sure that, hey, this definitely looks like white, that it reads as white, but it also reads as painted and not just primer. And that's my big issue when painting white, is that usually it's too clean and it looks just like someone primed a model and then left it be, which I don't want. Or it has a tendency to look a little on the chalky side. So this is going to be a little bit of a long process, and it's going to be a lot of me fiddling with both shades, highlights, and maybe even midtones. We might go back to the middle of things. And so it's always like really, really good to be mindful of where you think shadows are going to fall, and what's going to be picked up by the light as opposed to what should remain in shadow. So as I'm doing this, I'm being active and trying to see where the shadows already established are at, and not to kind of step on their gradients and build up realistic white highlights. And unfortunately, I think with the lighting that we have here, it might be a little on the difficult side to really fully see things.
So you excited about the trip to Ohio?
Yeah, me and Joe are going to Origins. We're taking a road trip together,
Yay, road trip.
and I'm definitely excited about that. I haven't been to Origins before, so also all my family's from Ohio.
I haven't been to a game convention yet, so it's gonna be my first one.
Well, good. What better game convention than a business trip?
Hey, well, you know, I get to see the sights.
Yeah,
Maybe drive by Great American Ballpark.
and Joe's brother John is also in Ohio, so we get to see both of our families, and John will be joining us at Origins as well, as part of the Gigabytes crew.
We're taking over.
Yeah.
The influence is spreading.
So a lot of what I'm doing is being careful, and like I said, working very slowly and establishing edges, and then working up from the edges I established. So like I'll try to paint as solid of a coat of white as I can on the front of a panel, and then I will attempt to spread that a little bit, once the white kind of settles or I get it into position, and keep that going up towards the like midpoint of the panel, and it builds a natural like gradient, and it also helps establish the thing as more of a white panel than like a grayish panel with some like white accents. So a lot of this white is going to be implied as opposed to having like legitimate white on there, and I kind of talked about this before, but it really helps tie the model together to do these kind of edge highlights. It establishes borders. It makes a panel read more as the color you want it to be, and it really makes stuff pop. The only issue is being as subtle as you can with it instead of just like glopping it on. However, sometimes like being aggressive with like an edge highlight is fine, especially when you're wanting to go for like a tabletop quality. Because like all you want to do is make someone be able to like look at it quickly and be like, oh yeah, I know what model that is, or yeah, I can see that detail, and that's fine. Just kind of depends on what you want to do. I myself am trying to go more towards painterly as lately, just improving my like studio quality work, I guess. I don't know if I can consider myself like at studio quality, but we'll call it that. And so basically I am working on these panels. I also need to clean up a lot of the like wash if it didn't dry smooth enough or like get as nice of a transition as I wanted. So it is all part of the process. Flat panels that are facing exactly towards the light source, wherever you decided to establish that, should be one of your brightest things. And also, if you're willing to push something and how bright it is, make sure it's sitting next to a super dark like panel or contrast, whether it's like a shadow that you put in or like artificial contrast, like putting in a like a black panel next to it, or like doing a bunch of like gunmetal or something like that. It's really important to break up those tones, because your eye is going to read something much brighter if it's next to something super dark. So we are in the process of just doing this, and if you guys are watching, feel free to chat or talk. It does help speed things up. Or if you have any problems with white, painting white, let me know here, because I won't be able to help you if you don't talk.
Yeah, so leave a comment in the comment section below, and we'll be more than happy to answer it for you. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to the trip as well.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be able to. I think we're gonna be listening to some audio tapes, right?
Yeah. I'm gonna give you a crash course in the lore of hopefully War Machine.
All right. Is it like the War Machine Genesis, the Book of Genesis, in the beginning?
No, not that much. Like, it should be a nice little constructed story.
Okay.
But it's really difficult to look at a game of War Machine and really see how grandiose the world is. Did you did you ever watch Full Metal Alchemist, Joe?
I did actually.
That is War Machine.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
With a little bit more fantasy.
All right.
But that is the core concept. Warcasters like Sorscha would be your state alchemists,
Okay.
and there's the big nations, which are called the Iron Kingdoms, and the lead one, Signar, is very close to the main nation from Full Metal Alchemist, because you think they're kind of good guys on the up and up, but they really usually have some sinister motivations to them, which. So I really enjoy the background fiction, and it is no means copy and paste Full Metal Alchemist. It's just, I think that's the easiest way to get someone into it and explain it.
Okay. I think the biggest thing for me is all the synergy, learning all the synergies between the special powers and the units.
That's usually the biggest hurdle for people to get over, is that, especially coming from as a new player, there's a lot of there's a lot of things to learn and take care of and build up synergy wise, in terms of your knowledge base. So a lot of times, when you're working with white, it won't have 100% coverage, which is absolutely fine because it lets you build layers. And
lots and lots of layers.
Lots and lots and lots of layers. Things you would want to do an airbrush for, you can easily accomplish with just thin paints, layers, and probably a little bit of two brush blending. So you'll hopefully have noticed me doing that a little bit going in. But yeah, so I am right now painting her armor. It's going to be hopefully a fairly, a little bit on the grayish side of things, but still very recognizable as white. And then from there, we're going to probably add a little bit of weathering to it, so it makes it look like she's been actually doing work. They turned on the smokestack on her back, and she's seen some combat in this armor already. But yeah.
So, now do you play any other miniature games other than?
I play a lot of miniature games. It's just War Machine has always consistently been my number one, and a lot of that has to do with it was my first game that I was exposed to. I understand it very well, and also it has a world that I really enjoy. I like the fluff a lot, and I like watching these characters I've known for the last 15 years progress and change and become something different than what they started off as. Sorscha was originally kind of a career-focused businesswoman in the Kadoran military. She ends up she ends up falling in love and then gets her heart broken. And this is the incarnation after the heartbreak, is her in this armor, because she wanted to get as far away from the person that upset her as much as possible, and that put her straight into the Armored Core Division.
Is she hunting down this guy or girl that?
No, she's not hunting him down. She's just trying to get away.
Oh.
And you know, maybe she took on something that was a little bit too extreme. You know, but she was someone who restricted her emotions for such a long time that when she finally did feel, she felt a little probably too much.
Oh, just releasing it all at once. Okay.
Yeah, and so it led her to maybe be a little bit brash and said, hey, put me in the furthest detachment away from this dude.
Because if I see him on the battlefield.
Yeah. Well, it also doesn't help that the dude that she fell for just recently got engaged to the Empress of their nation.
Well.
So the Empress was like, oh, hey, like, or this man's a good warrior. He does his business. He's also the head of a great household. Politically, it makes sense for me to go and get married to him.
And she's like, yep, it makes sense. I still don't like it, though.
Yeah, like, you know, no one's arguing the amount of sense it makes. It's just everyone else is kind of like, well, you know, you're doing this for just political reasons. You know, which is fine. She's the Empress. She's got to rule a nation, right? Like... So I'm going to have to make up some more white soon, because what I have is drying out. And I'm using a lot of the side of my brush for a fair amount of this detail. And that allows me to edge highlight without a lot of issues. Always make sure when you are looking at your models to take them out of your like studio lighting or whatever you got going on and hold them away from your face, just so you can get a little bit of perspective on how they're going to look, you know, actually on the table. Because the last thing you need to do is spend a lot of time working on a lot of details, and at the end of the day, when you actually like set the model down on the table, you don't see any of that. So using these palettes that we have here at Gigabytes, they're really nice, they're really easy to clean. You don't have to worry too much about like a lot of mess or anything like that. The only issue is, since they are not officially like a wet palette, is they will dry relatively quickly. So you gotta make sure you gotta freshen up your paints. And with thin paints, it allows you to constantly build up subtle transitions, highlights, shadows, all that good stuff. So don't be afraid to stop what you're doing and readjust your palette, as in, like, you know, maybe refill a paint or do a different color to help like soften a transition or maybe strengthen one. So I'm really excited because she's going to have these like red parts of her pauldron, which I'm really grateful that she's going to have this like splash of color to her, because it's really easy to, like, when you're painting white, like, you find your groove with the white paint and you just keep like rocking it, and then you find out it's like, oh man, this model's really monochromatic, it doesn't really like pop or have, you know, nice transitions to it, which means, like, you know, when you look at it from afar, it's like, oh, I guess that's nice, but it doesn't have that like wow factor. So definitely keep that in mind as you're working with stuff. Subtle soft transitions get you really far, but sometimes it's really easy to overdo it, and you lose a lot of that once you get like further out from the model. So I am going to keep working, and I'm seeing areas where I can like probably push the shadow a little bit more and try my best to get some more detail established, because like if I make everything super white, then it gets washed out like I was talking about earlier, and when it's washed out you can't really see any detail. So you go from being like, oh man, super high contrast model with like all this detail into it, to like just kind of a grayish white blob. You're like, oh man, lost it. So yeah, I'm actually going to go back to the shadow step and bump up some shadows. And this time I'm just going to go with more of a Crix base as opposed to just a Crix Bane highlight. And like when you're going from like a super light to a super dark, you can really thin down the paint to get that transition you want. So So I am now targeting more of rivets and lines and things like that now that I have this like darker wash. So I can kind of push panels forward.
What color do you think I should... I'm trying to figure out what color I'm going to choose to paint my elves.
So the standard scheme is white with teal accents, but that doesn't have to be yours. Like you can paint them all red. You can do. I had a red army for a very short amount of time, in which I painted them golds and purples. I did almost a like galaxy print on them.
His armor's 15, 17 inch.
And I think that worked out relatively well.
Yeah, I primed them gray. So
Okay.
I'm trying to figure out.
Gray's a great like starting point, and I will generally like recommend like if you get a good gray primer, like that will take you super far. And so gray's a good start, and I would kind of decide where you want to go from there, because you haven't like locked out any options by priming gray.
Okay.
So kind of figure out like, oh hey, I think I want them, you know, like brown or red, or you know, really anything at this point. Because like I said, you haven't locked anything out. The whole world's wide open to you. World's your oyster, Joe.
So that means there's a big pill in the center that I can go diving for?
Yeah, and you can only eat it on months that end with Y.
Is that an official rule?
No, I think that's like every odd month. I don't know what the rule is with oysters. You got to be like careful when you eat it.
Is there a specific reason why? I want to know what the history behind those rules are, because I know there's some kind of legend.
It's not like a legend. I think it has something to do with their like either reproductive habits or like their diet or something like that.
Okay.
Like there is a like legit reason why people avoid shellfish during certain months.
Right. Yeah, well, so for some reason I'm not really a big fan of seafood in general, except for salmon, crab cakes, and something else that I found delectable, and I don't know what it was.
Joe, I'm going to be honest, that's all seafood. I think you're a fan of seafood.
Well, I mean, the Pacific seafood. I mean, yeah, I'm
Yeah,
not.
well, like, have you tried Atlantic seafoff?
I've not tried Atlantic. I don't know about Atlantic.
Just Pacific you like.
Well, so far I've liked crab cake. I don't like shrimp. Not a big fan of. I'm not a big fan of shrimp.
I don't like shrimp either, man.
So, but no crab cakes and let's see, salmon and some other things. The small little. I don't know what they're called. I know them if I see them.
I also don't know what they're called, Joe.
Well, I figured that. Yeah. Oh, hey. Everybody's getting one of those Man-o-war.
Yeah, Man of Wars are in.
What is Man-o-war?
Man of War.
Man of War.
Man of War.
Man of War.
Man of Wars are the new hotness. They have that box set that's coming out in just a couple of weeks.
Yeah, and we have them here at Gigabytes, right?
Yep, we have them here for pre-order.
Hey, so if you're interested, come on down and stuff. So, all right, cool. Do you have any other box sets that
So they come out as the stuff's releasing. So Retribution doesn't currently have one.
Oh.
But they probably will in the near future since they're about to get a cycle.
Okay.
We don't know exactly what's going to be in that. We just know that it's going to happen.
Okay. We got the power.
But yeah, I am quickly running through some shadows on here, and I will probably cut the stream in just a couple minutes, guys, because we're hitting close to that hour range.
Oh yeah.
So thank you everyone for watching. I really appreciate you guys watching. Let me know what you're working on. Post, do whatever, ask questions.
Come on down, play some games.
Yeah, check